jump right in. We're going deep on this one, right? The Unbreakable Truth.
Yeah.
How oppression studies and identity politics divide society. Just look at this title. It looks like we're going to get into some pretty intense topics. Masculinity, family, freedom, like all the stuff that, really matters, especially these days. So before we even, crack this thing open, what is it about this book that really caught your eye? What are you hoping to get out of this deep dive with me?
I think what's really interesting is that this book, it seems like it's going to tackle some of those, some of those issues head on that a lot of people just don't want to talk about anymore. And the author himself, he's sort of on this personal journey, He's really trying to understand what's going on in the world. And he doesn't seem afraid to kind of question some of these mainstream narratives about, family, identity, and even just basic freedoms these days.
Okay, yeah. So let's start unpacking some of this then. The book really comes out strong, like right out of the gate, defending traditional masculinity. And it pushes back against that whole masculinity is toxic thing that we hear so much about. There's this one quote that really jumped out at me. It says, masculinity is not toxic, it's essential. It's the driving force behind men's achievements, their contributions to society, and their very survival. I mean, that's a pretty strong statement right there.
Yeah, it is. And it really kind of sets the tone for the whole book. I think, he's arguing that the decline of the nuclear family and what he sees as the rise of this radical feminism has actually created this crisis of masculinity. And it's like a lot of men are feeling lost. They don't know where they fit in anymore. And they're constantly being told that they're the problem.
Right. And I mean, you hear that a lot from guys these days. And then he kind of goes into this whole history of family structures, talking about that shift from the extended families to the nuclear family model.
Yeah.
The one that kind of became the norm for a while.
Right. And he contrasts that with what he sees as the erosion of that model in recent decades. He points to things like no-fault divorce laws as a major contributing factor. Right. His argument is that these policies, while they may have had good intentions, they've actually led to more instability in families, which ultimately hurts everyone, but especially children.
Yeah, and then he really goes after this tyranny of political correctness.
Mm-hmm.
He claims that the whole woke movement is basically stifling free speech and any kind of open debate. He uses some specific examples too, like what happened with Shane Gillis, the comedian, who lost opportunities because of jokes, some jokes that people found offensive. Mm-hmm. And even J.K. Rowling, who's faced a ton of backlash for her views on transgender issues.
Yeah, those are definitely some hot button issues. And it's interesting, how he uses those cases to illustrate this point that we're kind of losing the ability to just have open and honest conversations, even about difficult topics, right? Like, he argues that this woke culture, it creates these echo chambers where people are afraid to express any opinions that might go against the grain, even a little bit.
Yeah, and then he jumps right into, I think, probably one of the most controversial subjects, gender ideology. He takes a really firm stance that the biological differences between men and women, they're real, they're significant.
Yeah.
He really questions that whole idea that gender is entirely a social construct.
Yes, and he actually uses some pretty startling statistics to back this up. For example, he highlights studies that show higher suicide rates among transgenders, and he uses that to kind of question the prevailing narratives around transgenderism.
Wow, yeah, he's definitely challenging a lot of the conventional thinking on a lot of these sensitive issues.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look like he's going to stop there.
Yeah.
He goes on to explore the whole historical development of identity politics, starting with the civil rights movement and then moving into the social justice movements that we see today.
Yeah, and he tells this really interesting anecdote about a barbecue he went to where, they were just having a casual conversation about some societal issues. And it turned like super divisive really quickly because of, how everyone was viewing the world through this lens of their own identity group.
Yeah, it sounds like he's really trying to show how this stuff plays out in real life, not just in some academic theory. So how does he connect all of this to the broader societal shifts that he's concerned about?
Well, he argues that, identity politics, while it may have started with good intentions, has actually led to this kind of victimhood mentality that divides people rather than uniting them. It's like he's saying that we're moving away from seeing ourselves as individuals with shared values, and instead we're focusing more and more on our differences and our grievances.
It definitely feels like we're living in a time where people are quick to take offense.
Mm-hmm.
And they feel like they're being marginalized or silenced all the time. And then he turns his attention to socialism, criticizing its impact on on individual motivation and societal progress.
Yeah.
And he points to historical examples of what he sees as its failures.
Yeah, and he's especially critical of policies that he believes undermine personal responsibility and traditional values like hard work and self-reliance. He argues that these policies, they often incentivize people to be dependent on the government rather than encouraging them to strive for self-sufficiency.
And finally, he dives into this really fascinating, controversial chapter on what he calls radical depopulation policies. And he expresses concern about the influence of powerful figures like Bill Gates and their support for initiatives like population control.
Yeah, he's really critical of this Malthusian theory of population growth. You know, the one that argues that the Earth has limited resources and can only support a certain number of people. He challenges this whole theory, highlighting its flawed assumptions and arguing that these population control measures could have, disastrous unintended consequences.
Oh, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
He's raising some really thought-provoking issues. He seems like he's advocating for a return to traditional values and individual responsibility as kind of a counter to all these societal trends he's concerned about.
Exactly. He sees those values as the foundation of a healthy and prosperous society. And he argues that we need to rediscover them if we want to avoid what he sees as a path towards decline and societal breakdown.
This has been a really insightful look at this first part of the Unbreakable Truth. I'm definitely starting to see why you found this book so intriguing. Let's keep going. We'll delve even deeper into the rest of this thought-provoking book.
Yeah, it's like the thing that really hit me was how he connects all of this back to like a bigger picture, like this whole societal shift that's been happening. He's saying we've moved away from valuing things like personal responsibility and self-reliance. Now it's all about entitlement and playing the victim, and he thinks that's led to like a decline in traditional values and even a weakening of the institutions that have held society together for so long. Yeah, he uses this phrase progressive slumber.
It's kind of catchy.
Right.
And it describes this state of like complacency where people are just accepting these potentially harmful ideologies without really questioning them. It's like we're sleepwalking into a future where individual liberty and those traditional values are just fading away.
Right, and he's pretty clear about who he blames for this shift. He points the finger directly at radical feminism and what he sees as its war on men.
So he's saying that feminist ideology has created this climate where men are demonized, they're emasculated, and they're stripped of their traditional roles.
Exactly, and he gives all these historical examples of what he sees as feminist-driven policies that have had these unintended negative consequences for men. He talks about things like affirmative action and no-fault divorce laws, policies that maybe started with good intentions, but he argues that they've actually tilted the playing field against men and contributed to their declining well-being.
It's interesting how he brings in modern education too. He's critical of the way history and social issues are taught these days. This has become less about facts and more about pushing a specific ideology. He even goes so far as to say that this type of education is emasculating young boys. Those are his words.
Yeah, it's like he's arguing that it's all part of this bigger effort to undermine traditional masculinity and the roles that men have historically played in society. It's like he sees this connection between all these different things, from education to family structures, to the way men are portrayed in the media. It's all connected.
And that brings us back to his views on gender ideology. He's really worried about the impact this is having on children, especially the idea that the kids are being encouraged to question their gender identity at such a young age.
Yeah, he thinks that kids should be allowed to just develop naturally, without being pressured to conform to certain ideas about gender. He even warns about the potential for exploitation by corporations that are profiting from this whole rise of gender-affirming treatments and therapy.
And then he kind of shifts gears a little bit, and he starts talking about social media. He paints this pretty bleak picture of a society that's just consumed by it, where people are more connected to their devices than they are to each other, and where attention spans are just shrinking.
Yeah, he sees social media as this breeding ground for outrage culture, where people are so quick to judge and condemn others just for having different views. He even compares social media and addiction to substance abuse.
Yeah.
Citing studies that show similar patterns of behavior and negative consequences.
Right, and it's interesting how he doesn't just focus on the individual impacts of social media,
Yeah.
but he also talks about its broader societal effect. He argues that it's contributing to the polarization of our political discourse and the spread of misinformation.
Yeah, he's concerned about the decline of traditional values and the rise of what he calls the culture of hedonism, where people are becoming more and more self-centered and materialistic.
Yeah.
It's like we've lost sight of what truly matters.
He's saying we're too focused on pleasure and instant gratification, and we've lost our appreciation for things like hard work, sacrifice, and commitment. And he ties this back to the decline of traditional institutions like marriage and family, saying that those institutions provided a framework for living a meaningful life.
And he also takes issue with what he sees as the hypocrisy of the modern left. They claim to be champions of equality and social justice, but he argues that their actions often contradict their words.
Brings up examples of leftist politicians and celebrities who seem to live by a different set of rules.
Right. It's like one thing for them and another thing for everyone else. And he argues that this hypocrisy just undermines their credibility and erodes public trust in their ideas.
There's this really interesting concept he introduces, the idea of covert contracts in relationships, where men and women often have these unspoken agreements about their roles and responsibilities. And these agreements can lead to resentment and conflict down the road.
Yeah, he encourages readers to become aware of these covert contracts and to try to renegotiate them in a way that's more equitable and fulfilling for both partners. It's like we need to be more conscious of the dynamics that are at play in our relationships and make sure that both partners feel heard and respected.
What I found really impressive was how he really dives deep into the history and the philosophy behind the ideologies he's critiquing. He traces the development of ideas like Marxism, postmodernism, and critical theory, showing how they've evolved over time.
Yeah.
And how they've influenced our modern worldview.
Right, and he argues that these ideologies, while they're often presented as progressive and liberating, have actually led to a decline in individual liberty, a weakening of those traditional institutions, and a culture of division and victimhood. It's like he's tracing the intellectual lineage of the ideas that he believes are at the root of all these societal problems.
And he's not afraid to name names. He calls out specific thinkers and writers whose ideas he thinks have contributed to this shift in our culture. And he even connects these ideas to current events, showing how they're playing out in everything, from politics to education to social media.
It's a bold approach, but it definitely makes you think about the assumptions that we often take for granted. He's basically saying that these ideas, which have become so ingrained in our culture, are actually harmful, and they need to be challenged.
And he doesn't just stop at critique. He also offers this vision for a different kind of society, one that he believes would be more just, more equitable, and more fulfilling.
Right. He talks about the importance of reclaiming our masculinity, strengthening our families, and rediscovering the values that have made Western civilization strong.
It's a call to action, He's urging readers to become active participants in shaping a better future.
Yeah, he challenges readers to be more discerning consumers of information, to think critically about the messages they're getting from the media and from our institutions. It's like we need to take responsibility for our own understanding of the world and not just blindly accept the narratives that are being fed to us.
He also talks about the importance of building strong communities, connecting with like-minded individuals who share our values.
Right. He argues that those communities can provide support, encouragement, and a sense of belonging, which are so essential for navigating the challenges of the modern world. It's like we'll need to find our tribe, people who understand what we're going through and who can help us stay strong in our conviction.
The book is it's definitely a lot to take in.
Yes.
It's packed with information and thought-provoking ideas.
Yeah.
It's definitely making me reconsider some of my own assumptions and think more critically about the world around me.
Yeah, it definitely challenges the status quo on a lot of issues, but it's not just about complaining about the problems, it's about offering solutions. It's about empowering people to take action and to make a difference in their own lives and in their community. It's a call to action. It's an invitation to become more engaged and to fight for the world we want to live in.
Okay, let's take a moment to digest all of this before we jump into the final section of the book. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground already, and it's clear that this book, it doesn't hold back. Really digs into some tough stuff. But I'm curious, as we kind of head into the final stretch here, what's really stood out to you the most? Like what's resonated the most with you?
Well, I think what's really powerful and maybe even a little bit surprising is that, even though he's so critical of modern society, he doesn't just leave us feeling hopeless. Like there's a sense of optimism there, a belief that things can actually get better.
Yeah, he's not just doom and gloom. He's actually offering some solutions.
Yeah.
And speaking of solutions, he spends a good amount of time talking about these online communities, specifically the manosphere and the red pill community.
Yeah.
These groups, they often get a lot of negative press, but he kind of presents a slightly different perspective on them.
Right. He acknowledges that these groups can be, controversial, and some of their views on women and relationships, they might not sit well with everyone. But he also suggests that they're kind of a reaction to the very trends he's been critiquing, right? Like, it's a space where men who are feeling disenfranchised and misunderstood can find support and connect with others who get what they're going through.
He's saying that, while he may not agree with everything these groups say, it's important to understand where they're coming from, right? To see that there are some legitimate concerns that a lot of men in these communities have. It's like he's trying to build a bridge between what are often seen as opposing sides in this whole gender debate.
Exactly, and he argues that true equality it can only come when we recognize and respect the differences between men and women, their inherent differences, instead of trying to erase those differences or pretend they don't exist. He believes that both genders have unique strength and contributions to make, and it's only by working together that we can create a truly just and harmonious society.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into the Unbreakable Truth, what are some of the key takeaways you think our listeners should really walk away with? Like, what are the big ideas here?
Well, I think the author's main point is that, we're living in a time of really significant societal change where those foundational values and institutions that have always provided stability, they're being challenged, right? And he believes that a lot of this upheaval is being driven by those progressive ideologies that we've been talking about, ideologies that he argues have ultimately, undermined individual liberty, eroded personal responsibility, and fostered this culture of victimhood.
He's not just pointing fingers, right? He's actually offering a way forward.
Exactly. He calls on readers to wake up to these realities, to actively reclaim those traditional values of masculinity, family, and individual liberty that he believes are so essential for a thriving society. And he emphasizes that this is going to take courage, it's going to take conviction, and a willingness to challenge the narratives that we're constantly being bombarded with.
And finally, he kind of paints his picture of what a different kind of society could look like, right? A society where those core values are respected, where men and women can work together, harmoniously, where individual responsibility is celebrated, and where true equality flourishes.
Yeah, it's a vision that might seem idealistic to some, but he presents it as a real possibility, a future that's worth fighting for. And he challenges readers to become active participants in shaping this future, to speak out against the forces that are eroding our values, and to build a better world for ourselves and for future generations.
Well, I think it's safe to say that this book is definitely meant to spark conversation, to get people thinking critically about the world around them. He's not afraid to tackle tough subjects, and he definitely doesn't shy away from challenging the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
It's a call to action for anyone who feels like something's not quite right and is looking for answers and solutions.
Yeah, and if you're intrigued by what we've talked about today, and you want to dive deeper into the author's arguments, you can find The Unbreakable Truth on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive. Thanks for bringing this book to our attention. And remember, the most important thing is to keep questioning, keep learning, and keep engaging with the ideas that are shaping our world. Until next time.